The First Soviet-Finnish War, better known as the Winter War, cost the Soviets dearly. They had their victory in the end, but it was not the walk in the park they bargained for. In one of the coldest winters to ever sink its teeth into Finland, the Soviets learned a whole lot about war and a whole lot more about Finnish grit, taking as many as 380,000 casualties over a period of 3.5 months. But why was the Winter War such a slog? Why did the Soviets have such a terrible time? Let's find out. As with most things in war, the answer to our question is multifaceted. It wasn't just the size of Finland's balls that made things difficult for the Soviets. Firstly, when you're fighting for your home and loved ones, there's a good chance you're going to fight harder than you would for some dictator you've never met. The effect this has on morale can't be understated. As per Tomas Riss, a researcher from the National Defense College in Finland, Finland reacted with desperate determination. On the one hand, the country was determined to fight. On the other hand, Finland was also grimly prepared for the worst and began sending her children to safety in Sweden to cover the possibility of Stalin's national extermination programs. Winston Churchill echoed Riss, stating, "The Finns rallied to a man against the aggressor and fought with absolute determination and the utmost skill." Fighting on their home ground also gave the Finns a tactical advantage. As we discussed in our first video on battlefield terrains, Arctic conditions favour the defending force. Many of Finland's roads were made of gravel and were so narrow that the Soviets had to move in 100-kilometer long columns flanked by impassable forests, marshes and lakes. This was a bottleneck the Finns exploited, staging ambushes out of the wilderness through which they could move with instinctual ease. The Finns rotated out their men to give them some respite from the cold and attacked Soviet field kitchens to deny them sustenance and warmth. They also set mines in frozen lakes. When the mines exploded, the Soviets fell through the broken ice into the cold, dark depths. If the Soviets tried to circumvent the lakes, the Finns picked them apart with well-placed snipers and machine gun nests. Trudging through the snow and fighting in blizzard conditions, sickness and frostbite claimed Soviet lives and Soviet limbs, accounting for roughly a third of their 207,000 sick or wounded casualties. In the words of war correspondent John Langdon Davies, "Every acre of Finland's surface was created to be the despair of an attacking military force." Arctic equipment was something the Soviets were sorely lacking. The Finns had skis and knew how to use them, executing ski infantry ambushes, then French frying to safety. They travelled noiselessly over the land, using sleds and reindeer to move their heavier equipment and supplies. They understood the effects of the cold on their weapons and knew the importance of using antifreeze. For much of the conflict, the Soviets didn't even have winter camouflage. This made them easy sniping targets. Even their tanks were painted olive green. In April 1940, about a month after the Moscow Peace Treaty marked the end of the Winter War, Stalin and some of his top dogs assessed the Red Army's performance. The conversation was recorded and translated. In Stalin's words, "When war broke out, we discovered problems in all sectors. That happened because our troops and generals failed to adapt to the condition of a war in the Finnish terrain." Churchill agreed, stating the cold was intense. The Finns were well equipped with skis and warm clothing, of which the Russians had neither. Returning to the topic of tanks, the Soviets had as many as 6,500 at their disposal, whereas the Finns had like 30. The defenders also lacked dedicated anti-tank weapons. They improvised though, using ski infantry attacks to set satchel charges, throw Molotov cocktails, and stick things like crowbars and logs in the tank's wheels, jamming them up. They also buried granite boulders in place of tank obstacles. For the Soviets, a big part of the issue was that they didn't support their tanks with infantry, at least in the early days of the conflict. This made their tanks even easier pickings for the nimble Finns. Despite the fact that he did commit thousands of tanks to the conflict, Stalin made the following assessment. We need not hundreds, but thousands of tanks. If tanks are thick-skinned, they would make wonders covered by our artillery and infantry. He also discussed the need for more artillery pieces and aircraft, as well as more ammunition for literally everything. In Stalin's words, those who want to lead a modern war can't talk about sparing of bombs. This is rubbish. More bombs have to be dropped on the enemy in order to deafen him and turn upside down his cities. The more shells, the less of our people will be lost. With that said, it was the Finns, not the Soviets, who were having ammo troubles, relying largely on captured arms and ammo. Another factor that Stalin deemed critical was the Red Army's overconfidence. A couple of months before they tried Finland on for size, the Soviets made a Poland sandwich with Germany. If anything, this was a walk in the park, and it led many Soviets to believe that war was easy and that no one could stand against the sheer numbers and the might of the Red Army. This is best communicated once again in the words of Stalin. The Polish campaign did us bad. It spoiled us. Some comrades boasted that our army is unbeatable, that we can easily win, and we don't have any shortages. This hindered our army to understand their deficiencies and reshuffle, rebuild, in accordance with the conditions of Finland. Our army didn't realize that war in Poland was a military walk and not a war. It didn't understand that in Finland, there wouldn't be a walk, but a real war. Overconfidence would have been prevalent throughout the Red Army's ranks, though much of the blame falls on the officers who failed, at least in the early stages of the conflict, to prepare their troops for the realities of a drawn-out war against the Finns. Stalin chalked this up to the quality of his officers too, believing they were too caught up in the traditions of the Russian Civil War, which was largely fought without tanks, artillery, and aircraft, all critical components of modern war. To quote the Mustache Devil, worship of the traditions of the Civil War hindered our generals and officers to rebuild the conditions of the modern war. He does not understand that one cannot lead an attack without artillery barrages. He sometimes leads regiments with the hurrah. Traditions and experience of the Civil War are absolutely not sufficient. Those who find them sufficient will die for sure. What Stalin seemed to have forgotten though was that he was responsible for crippling his command. The Red Army might have had an easier time fighting the Finns if Stalin hadn't got rid of many of his best commanders during the 1936 and 1938 Great Purge. Returning to the subject of overconfidence, or so-called hurrah, the Red Army's frontline political commissars were also to blame. Stalin concluded that they weren't politically resilient, educated, and cultured enough, and weren't so well versed with military matters. He said it wasn't enough that they were simply repeating the party of Lenin and Stalin like hallelujah, hallelujah. The commissars were essentially just geeing everybody up with little consideration to the Red Army's current predicament, a real gritty war against the Finns. However, the Soviets did learn as the war went on and did achieve victory over the stalwart Finns, absorbing 11% of Finland's territory. The Red Army that went into Finland was not the same one that came out. Lessons learned in the Winter War proved critical to the rest of World War II, which was really just getting started. On the other side of the coin, the Red Army's performance in the Winter War made it seem weak in the eyes of Hitler, who, while enjoying some early success in Operation Barbarossa, definitely underestimated how much the Soviets had adapted themselves to modern war since their slog through Finland. Stalin commented on this directly. Our people are new people, and despite all deficiencies, they very rapidly transformed. Our army exited Finland as a quite modern army. We've only scratched the surface here, so we're interested to know your thoughts. Can you think of any other reasons why the Soviets had such a tough time in Finland? Can you expand on any of the factors we covered in this video? Lastly, how different do you think things would have gone if Stalin hadn't offed his generals before World War II even started? Please feel free to share all your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.